Most of you know that America is on the verge of a financial collapse. So if you're into politics or just watching the news, you may have noticed 5 hot topics that relate to the possible financial collapse in America. They are the government shutdown, Affordable Care Act, the national budget, the national debt, and the debt ceiling. The media would like you to believe that these topics have nothing to do with each other, but in reality, they have everything to do with each other. In this video, we're going to show you how they relate. National debt is the total amount that the federal government owes because of money it has borrowed by selling bonds and other securities. The U.S. debt has grown to be $17 trillion. This debt actually started in the 1790s after the Revolutionary War. Before World War I, our debt was $1 billion. By the end of World War II, our debt totaled to $259 billion. Between 1865 and 1940, our debt has gone up and down. By the end of the 1940s, our debt has never stopped growing. From 1933 to 1971, the gold standard began to falter. Now, the gold standard is a monetary system in which the economical unit of account is based on a fixed quantity of gold. So say if you had $40 billion worth of gold, varying on the price of gold at that time, that's how much money was allowed to be in the open market. So if something was to happen to the US dollar, it would be backed by gold, after spending so much on wars and bills that passed through Congress. Thus, there was more paper bill currency than gold. In 1971, Richard Nixon abolished the gold standard, which resulted in our government not having a limited spending amount. Thus, the paper bills became the United States currency. Therefore, the American people took money for what was said on the paper bill. Our government can't pay its debt because it is mostly grown compound interest. Thus, our government prints more money and puts it into the stock market. So then there's more money being distributed throughout our country, enabling the value of the US dollar to go down. Our government has 3 options: raise taxes, default, or inflation. If we do claim default, then all the countries who have invested in the United States would be affected by our default. For example, after World War I, Germany could not pay their debts from purchasing food, weapons, and supplies, which led them to print more money, causing inflation. It literally took a wheelbarrow load full of money to buy a loaf of bread because there was so much inflation. This will or may happen to the U.S. if no steps are taken to control our finances better than our appointed political leaders.
The debt ceiling is a restriction on how much money the government can borrow to pay off its existing commitments. New spending is not authorized by the debt limit. Its purpose is only to allow for pledge payments to be made on such things as interest on the national debt, tax refunds, military salaries, Social Security, and Medicare benefits. Since its beginning, it has been raised 78 times to avoid default. Its original purpose was to give the president more freedom to accumulate debt without getting approval first. Once being as low as $49 billion in the 1940s, it was raised to extreme figures. In May of 2013, it stood just under $16,700 billion. There is controversy as if to raising the debt ceiling adds to our debt or not. Since it does not increase spending, President Obama says that it does not increase our debt either. Others disagree, since it does add extra borrowing. The fact we can all agree on is that the debt limit and the national debt will continue rising until we find a way to only spend within our means.
The United States federal budget is how much money the government plans to spend in a year. This is important because without a plan, the spending could go out of control. There are 12 categories of spending that are taken into consideration. These categories, which have changed over the years, range from military to healthcare to education. The amount of money allotted to each category changes from year to year as well. The money that the government spends comes from either taxes collected from American citizens or money it has borrowed from foreign nations. It all started in the 1921 Budget Act. Federal spending had just skyrocketed during World War I, and the government was getting a little nervous. The Budget Act created the Office of Management and Budget, or the OMB for short. This office gives spending guidelines to federal agencies and requires the government to submit an annual budget. How does an annual budget get made? It starts with the President himself. He does a lot of research on predictions for the coming year and submits a budget request to both the House and the Senate. Budget request is his opinion on what the budget should look like. Next, the House of Representatives and the Senate pass budget resolutions. A budget resolution is a framework for the budget. Then, the members of Congress form subcommittees, one for every spending category. These 12 subcommittees argue within themselves about how much money they need for their individual programs, and they make a final vote called an appropriation bill. Once all the appropriation bills for all the spending categories get decided on by the House and the Senate, the final budget gets sent back to the President, who signs it into law. Ta-da! We have the budget. This process takes a lot longer than it sounds, because almost every person involved has a different idea of how money should be spent. That's a lot of arguing. Now we get to the bad news. Did you know that the last actual budget was passed in 2009? They've just been passing continual resolutions ever since. A continual resolution stretches the budget to last for a few more months. These are just temporary solutions that don't help the debt or the spending dilemma. In 2012, the federal spending included only 7% for paying off interest on debt. The year after that, it was lowered to 6%, which tells us the government appears to be ignoring the debt problem. If that's not bad enough, almost every single president in U.S. history has planned to spend more than the government makes in a year. How's that for smart? What happens when the government spends more than it collects? It has to borrow more money from foreign nations, which creates debt. We all know that is a bad idea, right? So how does the budget affect the debt? If we plan to spend more than we make or save, we're counting on foreign loans to make up for the difference. So if the federal budget is poorly planned, we'll just keep on adding more debt. That's why it's so important for the people making the budget to take into account all the spending categories, and most importantly, spend wisely.
A government shutdown occurs when Congress and the executive branch cannot come upon an agreement for a specific bill or spending measure. That's when Congress creates a funding gap by choosing not to or failing to pass legislation, funding government operations and agencies. This means that all spending is put to a grinding halt. Or is it? Well, if the government shut down, then why are many federal employers getting laid off and then collecting back pay? In other words, they are getting a paid vacation. And approximately 1,350,000 essential federal employees were still working for the government that had been shut down. Not to mention the money going towards blocking off the national-owned properties from the American citizens. According to Rand Paul, 85% of federal activities were actually being funded during the shutdown, and not to mention the Affordable Health Care Act. So if the government is funding the activities and paying their employers and paying the national properties to be blockaded, where are they getting the money to spend? Seeing how they were debating on raising the debt ceiling. So if they already reached their spending limit, then why are they spending more money they don't have? Isn't that why they had shut down to stop spending? Well, the Supreme Court continued to operate normally, and federal courts had enough money to keep running for at least 2 weeks. And President Obama was paid for the full duration of the shutdown, and the U.S. Congress was also paid. A very similar dispute happened in 1995 over Bill Clinton's health care plan. Well, that caused the government to shut down because they could not come upon an agreement. As a result of that shutdown, which lasted 3 weeks, it took many federal employers out of work temporarily. That was the longest shutdown in American history. But one thing that caught my eye was that the past 17 government shutdowns, they did not prevent American citizens from visiting national properties until the government shut down this last year. Why did the government decide to keep Americans out of national properties on the last government shutdown? What makes this shutdown so special from the past shutdowns?
Dramatically, on March 23, 2010, President Barack Obama signed a problematic law called the Affordable Care Act. This law had over 11,000 pages of rules. Stacked up, that is almost 3 feet tall. The ACA was designed to provide insurance for the 48 million uninsured Americans. The ACA will also help those who have to buy their insurance with small business companies, which is expensive and unreliable. The ACA is trying to solve America's health difficulties, however it has many heavy, horrible hiccups itself. The ACA has many new laws that need to be written to make it work smoothly. The caring for the elderly who are out of the workforce is a vast problem. The part of the ACA that addresses this is called Community Living Assistance and Supports, or CLASS for short, but it was suspended in October of 2011 because of its unsure payment ideas. Not counting CLASS, the total cost of Obamacare is clear. The total cost is $1.08 trillion. That is the same cost of 143 Big Mac meals from McDonald's. The source of this cost is taxes, lots and lots of taxes. The average American will find himself facing more taxes and will struggle to pay them. If he already works for a company that offers insurance that he uses, one will still be required to pay these taxes. If a company does not offer insurance, they must either help their employees get insurance or pay a fine. This will force the employers to cut work hours or cut workers, lowering the amount of money each person gets. Obamacare is a legislatively good idea that benefits a small amount of the population and financially burdens the majority.
How do these 5 points relate to each other? Government shutdown was caused by our need to pass a national budget. Our national budget includes how much our country will spend and make, which in turn can increase or decrease our national debt. If our national debt continues to rise, we will have to raise our debt ceiling. Obamacare was in the national budget that they were trying to pass. The House refused to pass this national budget, which in turn caused the government shutdown. Obamacare will increase our national debt and cause us to raise the debt ceiling. Now, why should anyone care about any of these topics? Every action that our country takes, there is an opposite reaction. The question is, what will happen if our national debt continues to increase and we can't pay it off? Our country will go bankrupt. We don't know when it will happen, but it will happen. What can happen when a country goes bankrupt? Stock markets crash and credit is seized. Financial institutions can fail. Government funding can end, which includes medical, defense, police, education, utilities, food stamps, and so much more. Businesses close and jobs are lost. There's rioting and people are without food. The rich will buy the country and end up in control. That is what can happen. Let us look at what has happened. This is what happened to Argentina in 1999. Wealthy people took their money and left overnight. Over $40 billion left the country. There was a mass run on banks, which means a large number of customers withdrew deposits from a financial institution at the same time and demanded cash, transfer of funds into government bonds, or precious metals. The country's national currency collapsed. The government froze all bank accounts for a year, only allowing withdrawals of $250 a week. The president declared a state of emergency. Unemployment soared to almost 25%. Barter networks sprung up to make up for the shortage of money, and many people began to rely on them. Argentina products were also refused by some countries in fear of damage or poor condition. America today enjoys free benefits from the government, but what we don't understand is they're really not free. We'll have to pay for all of them or our country will go bankrupt. We're not only hurting our generation, but we're hurting our children and grandchildren's generations. The question is, are you willing to help save our country from its financial crisis? We need to care about who we vote for, the laws that are passed, and how they will affect America. America is a ticking time bomb, and the only code to saving it is a generation who cares and is willing to make a change. Will you be that change? Will you help us save our country?